Hey everyone! Today I want to talk about some of the key differences between driving in Europe and the United States and explain why Europe's roads are better designed for drivers. One of the biggest differences is that European roads are much narrower than American ones. Many streets in historic city centers are only wide enough for one car to pass through at a time. This is partly because European cities were built long before the invention of cars, so roads had to be retrofitted for automobiles. American cities had more space to work with when designing roads. For example, streets in old city centers like Rome or Paris were laid out hundreds of years before cars were invented. Retrofitting these medieval streets that were built for horses and carriages to accommodate automobiles has been a challenge. Many streets end up very narrow as a result, whereas American cities like Los Angeles or Houston could plan their road networks around cars from the beginning. The upside of narrower streets is that they naturally force people to drive slower and more cautiously. With less room for error, drivers have to be more aware of their surroundings. This results in fewer accidents. Wide multi-lane highways can lull people into a false sense of security and lead them to drive recklessly. The narrow streets in old European city centers force drivers to be alert and drive cautiously. There's little margin for error, so you have to be attentive. You're sharing the tight space with pedestrians and cyclists too. Meanwhile, a 12-lane interstate highway in America can make people complacent. With so much open road ahead, it's easy to zone out and drive on autopilot at high speeds. This leads to weaving in and out of lanes and passing dangerously. In addition to narrower roads, you'll notice roundabouts are far more common in Europe than in the US. These circular intersections with yield signs allow traffic to keep flowing instead of stopping at lights. Drivers only have to yield to cars already in the roundabout. This is much more efficient than having four-way stops or traffic signals at every intersection. Studies have consistently shown that roundabouts reduce accidents by around 35% compared to traditional intersections. They lower carbon emissions from idling vehicles and also require less maintenance since there are no traffic lights to repair. The US has been slowly adding more roundabouts, but Europe embraced them decades ago. Another design element you'll see throughout Europe is traffic calming measures on residential streets intended to reduce speeds. These can include speed bumps, chicanes, raised crosswalks, narrowed lanes, and other physical cues to prompt slower driving. This makes neighborhoods safer and quieter. Planners know speed is a major factor in accident severity, so designs that encourage lower speeds are better. In the US, many suburban and rural roads are made as wide open as possible to allow people to drive fast. But this comes at the cost of more dangerous crashes when they occur. The European approach limits speed by design rather than just posting speed limit signs that are often ignored. You'll notice many rural highways and suburban arterials in America have very wide lanes, huge shoulders, and limited access points. These design choices allow for higher speeds, but also enable riskier driving. In Europe, even when there are multiple lanes, they keep lane widths tighter. This automatically causes drivers to go slower without needing lower speed limit signs. The European approach of using road design to manage speeds is ultimately safer. When it comes to signage, Europe tends to have more consistent road sign design across countries. For example, throughout Europe, speed limit signs are round with a red border, whereas US speed limit signs are rectangular and more inconsistent from state to state. Having a uniform, easy-to-recognize signs aids navigation for drivers who cross borders. The uniformity of European road signs makes driving in different countries smoother. Once you learn what the signs mean in one place, you can recognize them anywhere in Europe. This helps when crossing borders. In the US, sign shapes, colors, and symbols vary more from state to state, which can be confusing. Standardized signs like Europe uses help drivers focus on the road instead of deciphering signs. Consistent signage across borders is one of the advantages of driving in Europe. European signs also tend to show context along with speed limits, such as having an image of a house where a lower speed limit enters a residential area. This helps people understand why slower driving is needed in certain zones. The US could benefit from more context-based signage to improve compliance with speed limits. In city centers, Europe also favors pedestrian safety over vehicle level of service. Crosswalks are wider, timed for walking speed, not driving speed. Traffic lights are timed to stop all vehicles at once to let crowds of pedestrians cross safely in groups. Many streets are designated pedestrian only with bollards that block vehicle access. On the motorways connecting countries, Europe has an advantage with more consistent design standards across national borders. For example, lane widths, shoulder widths, tolling systems, and rest stop spacing are similar from country to country. This helps make driving predictable and less confusing when crossing between nations. The US has more variation between state highway systems. Now the US does some things better when it comes to road user comfort and convenience. Our interstate highway system has provided a superior network of high-speed divided highways linking all major cities for decades now. Most American highways also have large buffers between travel lanes in opposing directions to reduce head-on crashes. Europe is investing to catch up on roadway connectivity and quality. However, the US has long prioritized long-distance automobile travel over other modes. With coast-to-coast interstate highways funded in the 1950s, we gave cars a huge head start over European motorways. The US built an expansive interstate highway system decades before Europe did the same with its motorway network. The US system connected our entire continental nation with high-speed divided highways starting in the 1950s. Europe was slower to make these big investments in roads due to higher urban density and more reliance on rail. So the US has had superior long-distance roadways for generations now compared to Europe. But Europe is working to catch up and now investing heavily in state-of-the-art motorways to rival the American interstates. In summary, while US roads allow for higher speeds and more direct connections on rural highways and suburban arterials, Europe tends to have safer urban street designs and more seamless networks across international borders. Features like narrower lanes, roundabouts, traffic calming, and pedestrian prioritization all make European roads safer overall. But both continents have made trade-offs and continue working to improve roadway safety. The US has prioritized efficiency and driver convenience with wide, fast rural highways and huge freeway interchanges catering to cars. Europe has favored slower urban driving and pedestrian spaces while trying to standardize roads between countries. Both approaches have merits and drawbacks. As we look to the future, the US can learn from European designs that induce cautious driving, while Europe can emulate the connectivity of America's interstate network. Automakers can also help by adding new safety tech features to cars. The goal of safer roads is a shared challenge on both continents. As a driver, I initially found Europe's narrow roads and ubiquitous roundabouts frustrating. I was used to wide open lanes and traffic signals dictating the right of way. But I've come to appreciate these designs that compel cautious driving. The small streets and roundabouts make you hyper-aware of pedestrians, cyclists, and other cars. It feels safer with traffic naturally flowing slower. While an adjustment coming from the US, Europe's emphasis on safety over speed or convenience ultimately benefits all road users, including drivers. The designs force you to be a more careful driver. So next time you're driving abroad in Europe, take note of the different philosophies that mold their street designs. I think you'll start to see that many of them are smarter approaches that consider all users, not just cars. Let me know if you have any other thoughts or questions about comparing European and American roads. And as always, be sure to drive safely. When you drive in Europe, pay attention to how the road designs differ from what you're used to in America. Notice how narrower lanes, traffic calming features, and pedestrian priority make you drive more slowly and carefully. I think you'll gain an appreciation for how European transportation planners try to balance the needs of drivers, cyclists, and pedestrians together. Compared to the US model of wider, faster roads that cater primarily to cars. Let me know your reactions to driving in Europe, and make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a like on the video. I'm happy to discuss more differences between European and American transportation networks. Drive safely and enjoy your travels.